All right, hello everyone, and welcome to this current edition of Truth Noir. I want to introduce, for the second time on this stage, a dear friend of mine and a fellow seeker of the truth, Tom Stenberg. Good to have you back, man.
Thank you.
The last time Tom was on this show, we were talking about conspiracy theories as it turned out actually happened. And we talked about false flag events that the Joint Chiefs of Staff were trying to perpetrate against the American people during the Kennedy administration. And among them, they included blowing up airplanes full of college students.
Which has been done, by the way.
Yeah, it's been done since then.
There have been planes full of kids that have been shot down by U.S. jets, or other nations for that matter.
Absolutely, man. And, and it was one of those things that the reason why it didn't happen at the time is that you had a person who happened to be in office that didn't allow it to happen. And then what happened to him afterwards? He was assassinated. It's fucking weird, right? Now, I'm not going to say that that person was like a great human being. Yeah, he cheated on his wife, and he smoked weed in the White House. But you know what? He didn't stand up for hundreds of American citizens getting murdered at the hands of their own government, and that's why he was assassinated. As it turns out, it was called Operation Northwoods, and this is a series of documents that has become available through the Freedom of Information Act that is available, and this is a thing that we talked about before. This is a site called the National Security Archive, and it is hosted through George Washington University in Washington, D.C., the capital of our nation. And so please look into it. It's where a lot of the source material for this show comes from, and ignorance is no excuse anymore, you guys. And this is what we're trying to perpetuate, and hope that we do this in the hopes that some of you come along with us, and then in doing so amongst yourselves, spread that knowledge to other people. And so Tom is another person who I found that is concerned about these things also. He's a little bit more worldly than myself. He comes from a different country and also a little bit different generation, and he has a lot to add to these discussions also. And so I want to turn it over to him a little bit before we get into like the specific topic of our show tonight, and let him speak to you a little bit.
Well, there's so many things to speak about in terms of what's going on in America right now. We're going into an election year, which I think is always a pain because we have to watch all these stupid ads.
For sure.
For the next year. And I often ask these two questions. How do you know when politicians are lying? Well, their lips are moving. How do you know when they're telling the truth?
Pretty much.
When they call each other liars. So, that's what we're going to be looking at for the next year. So just hang in there, America. It's going to be a lot of fun. But there was just a debate today with the Republican candidates, and he had none other place than the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley.
That was today, right?
That was today. There were 11 clowns on the stage, and it was just amazing. It would have been a crash course in misrepresentation, denial, and lying in terms of where we are now, where America is now compared to where they were before Barack Obama became president. And nobody talked anything about what happened while George W. Bush was president, except that Jeb Bush came out and said he kept us safe. As far as I remember, 9/11 happened on his shift.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that that person kept us safe under his watch. And then, as it turned out, thousands more Americans died in wars in a foreign country that has since been proven had nothing to do with 9/11. And then, since then, because these veterans went and they followed their orders and they served their country and they put on their uniforms because they thought that what they were doing was right. They came home after seeing these horrible things with physical and mental health problems that the government was ill prepared to deal with, and then and as it turns out, they've still done nothing for them. And it turns out that this is a problem with government in general.
Well, mind you, this goes back to the Vietnam War. I mean,
Sure.
I know a lot of Vietnam veterans who are my age that have to fight for their benefits, have to fight to get medical treatments or whatever they need. And this is after all these years, still not really happening. So I think that's a disgrace.
It is absolutely. Like, if you're going to send these people over to do what you know full well at the time is that, like, they're going to have to do some pretty horrible things.
And you may not come home.
You may not come home, and if you do, you're going to either be scarred physically or mentally. And then at this point in time in our great societal, evolution, to come home from after doing these things, whether it was Korea or Vietnam or Persian Gulf 1 or Persian Gulf 2,
Or Afghanistan.
and have your government say to you, sorry, you're on a waiting list. After you put on that uniform and after you served your country, to hear that is an absolute disgrace. And as it turns out, and I try to be nonpartisan, but as it turns out, it's conservative politics in the research that I've done that they love the soldier, they love going to war, and they love putting out the propaganda to rile up the people. It's like, all right, fine, let's do it. Let's go do horrible shit to people that, as we come to find out years afterwards, didn't do a goddamn thing to us. We killed millions of those people that didn't do anything to us.
No, but they probably had something we wanted one way or the other.
Oh yeah, well, they had resources, but when it comes out that, or at least as the official story says, that Osama bin Laden is the one that masterminded this thing, and he was the one who, built up the Taliban. Well, tell you what, assholes, Ronald Reagan is the one who funded Al-Qaeda and the Taliban under Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden.
Well,
Okay, look it up. Like, it's just one of those things.
You know what always puzzles me is about Ronald Reagan is that so many people refer to Ronald Reagan as one of the greatest presidents of the United
They're
States.
the hero king of the Republican Party,
And
right?
in my I've been here all this time, and it's obvious to me that the downfall of the economy and the fleecing of America and the destruction of the school systems and other social services, which obviously are necessary if you want to perpetrate a society,
Sure.
all started under Ronald Reagan. And, it's just hard for me to imagine how anybody in their right mind can think that he was one of the greatest presidents of the United States, unless you are a narrow-minded Republican, which of course there are plenty of those. So.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, I don't like to get into Democrat versus Republican. I like to get into liberal versus conservative, because it's conservative politics that, and
Trickle-down economics.
yeah, trickle-down economics,
Ronald Reagan.
conservative politics, because people, and the favorite of Republicans is to say, well, that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, which he was. Like, there was a party shift that happened But I feel like what it really comes down to is conservative versus liberal politics. And if it were for conservative politics, there would still be slavery. Women would not have the right to vote. Like the favorite conservative argument is, well, are we gonna ask women their opinion? When men were the only ones that were allowed to vote? If we're gonna ask women their opinions, or what are we gonna do next? We're gonna ask horses we're gonna make policy decisions based on what we ask our horses. And the appropriate response is like, no, you dumb fuck. We're just gonna treat people like human beings. If it were up to conservative politics, we would still be asking the question, or like it wouldn't even be anymore. It would just be like, well, interracial marriage, like, well, if we allow a black man and a white woman to get married, what are we going to do next? Are we going to allow a white man to marry a horse or a deer? And the correct response to that is, no, you fucking moron. We're going to treat people like human beings.
And also, by the way, if somebody wants to marry their horse, who gives a shit?
Well, yeah, and this comes down to a thing also where it's like, are you hurting anyone?
Exactly.
Well, tell you what, why don't you go ahead and calm the fuck down? Like you can take any, and you did. Like we took this concept, to a ridiculous level. And as it turns out, like, no, we're just like looking out for each other. And where I don't consider myself a Democrat or Republican because I do believe that they are both garbage. I am about people treating each other like brothers and sisters. And it's at this point in the episode where we come to our main topic, which is for-profit prisons. And this is a plague of society that actually, as it turns out, is unique to America. It is a disgusting practice, and the definition of it is, and its original occurrence in American society was based on the concept of that, the prison system is overcrowded. We have so many criminals on the state and federal level. And then people started saying, well, we'll build private facilities and you can take your prisoners there. And we'll charge the government, a premium to house these people there. And it'll just be like a normal jail. Oh, great. Everyone was like, oh, yeah, we got so many criminals now. We've got to house them somewhere. But it turns out, team, my fair audience, that this is not a thing that we should be supporting, this for-profit prison system. And we have a few reasons to share with you. Not the least of which, it's actually not cheaper for the American government to pay a private entity to house criminals. As it turns out, there was a study done. There were two studies done. One of them was by Temple University, and this is the one that is most often quoted as, being the proof that the privatization of the prison system was cost effective and helped save the state and federal government's money. But there was one thing that they failed to mention. Like, there were a few things, but the mainmost of which is that study performed by Temple University was funded by the 3 largest private prison corporations in America.
Coincidence, isn't
well, yeah, no, of course, oh, well, sorry, guys. But yeah, and as it turns out that when someone pays you to say something, it turns out to be not valid. It turns out to be what we call a logical fallacy. That is one of the highest degradations of logic, when you pay someone to say something. So there was another study done by the University of Wisconsin. The findings of this study have been repeated by a number of other entities that do scholarly research. And as it turns out, it costs more to house prisoners in private facilities because of that premium. It's not just, oh, well, you committed a crime, you're in this place, we have to feed you and clothe you, and that costs a certain amount per day. Your clothes you get issued once. If you're in a private prison system, the way it turns out is they start charging you with additional offenses when you're in there.
So they can keep you longer.
Yeah, because that's
You're a paying guest.
Yeah, because that's good for business. You guys, and it turns out that on average, the prisoner that is held in a private detention facility ends up earning for the private prison facility that holds them about $6,000 more per year each.
But let's just rewind a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And look at the fact that for one thing, there's no nation or country in the world that has more incarcerated people than the United States. And the exploding population in the prisons leads me to wonder, couldn't we find a better definition than criminal? Because so many people in the prison system now are not criminals. They are people who were rolled into the ruse of the war on drugs.
Sure.
Which is one of the costliest and most disastrous efforts that the United States government has ever gone into, and obviously nobody is winning that war other than the operators of the private prison facilities.
Well, yeah, and you have to think that when it is in the best interest of someone to keep you behind bars because it pads their wallet, they're not interested in rehabilitating you. Like in many other countries in the developed world, there's this concept of, okay, you did wrong. What was the reason for it? And they find out that reason. Okay, well, you don't know how to read. You weren't able to get a good job, and that's why you started robbing people. That's why you started selling drugs. Okay, well, let's teach you how to do something. How about that? While you're paying your debt to society, we will teach you how to do something that will allow you to contribute to society when you get out.
And in fact, if you look at the way
Right?
that prisoners are being treated in this country versus other countries,
It's barbaric.
then, the only thing they learn behind bars is how to become criminals. If they aren't already, then when they come out, they'll have a skill set that you can't learn anywhere else but in the prisons.
Yeah.
And if you go to Norway, for example, the incarceration in Norway is under extremely humane conditions,
Sure.
with access to all kinds of educational and cultural information and education, and it is completely focused on rehabilitation. It's very much the same thing in Denmark, where I come from.
Sure.
And the contrast is so sharp when you look at the objective that is supposed to be achieved versus what's really happening in this country with the prison population. And I think to a large degree, it's like many other things, or almost everything else in America, it's all about money.
Absolutely, and it's one of those things where, when you consider that, and like you said, or like you were starting to say, as it turns out, fully half of the incarcerated people in the world, like if you take the world prison population, half of them are incarcerated in this country. A full 1% of the American population lives in prison at any given point in time. And so we've gone over a couple of particulars of the studies that have been carried out, but I wanted to read a couple of facts that are true about the for-profit prison system. One of them is, when the government, obviously these are people that are convicted of crimes by the government, whether it's state government or whether it's federal government. These are people that are that have been found guilty of crimes, and so when they contract out, the government contracts these people out. It's like they're selling these people to private prison corporations. These are the promises that they make. One of the promises that the government makes to these private prison corporations is that they will fill 90% of the bed space in these facilities on average. And so if there's not enough people committing crimes to fill 90% of the bed space, what are they going to do? They're going to pay for that bed space no matter what, the local or state or federal government. So they have to fill those beds somehow, right? And we're all familiar with, how records are falsified to protect certain individuals that wear badges, right, that are supposed to protect and serve the population. But when it turns out that they're under orders to fill a certain number of beds in a prison, regardless of whether people are actually guilty of a crime or not, it kind of makes me think, what is the motivation? Are the police actually out there to keep you safe?
So are you saying there's a quota, basically, that needs to be filled?
I'm saying that there has been a quota for a long time, but it has never been so insidious as it is now. Because it used to just be, well, you guys, let's have a competition. Let's write a certain number of tickets. But when a local or state or federal government is required to fill a certain amount of beds or else pay a penalty,
There's some unreal pressure there. For what reason?
yeah, man, they're going to start writing you tickets for stupid shit.
Well, for one thing, just talk about something benign like traffic tickets. We all know that the cops are out there writing tickets left and right, especially here in Los Angeles, because we don't have to drive. And we all know that it's all about money.
Sure.
And they write you a ticket on a very flimsy background.
Well,
and then you have to go to court. And guess what? If you don't go to court, they're going to collect some money.
Sure. And you also, if you don't go to court, you have a warrant out for your arrest. You're guilty of a crime now.
If you don't pay the ticket, yeah. I'm talking about it. If you don't want to go to court, well, you pay the ticket.
Right.
And sometimes you look at it, if it's a $130 ticket, is it worth a day of your life to throw away a day of your life for $130? Probably not.
Well, there's that. And then there's also the concept that that's just the fine. That doesn't even include court costs, right? So if you get written a ticket for an offense and that fine is $100, you're probably going to be on the hook by the time you walk out a free person, probably about $300 or $400.
Oh, yeah, of course.
If you have a fine for $1,000, you're probably paying $2,000 or $3,000 in fines and court costs by the time you get to call it a day. And the questions that we ask ourselves at this point are, is that fair jurisdiction under the law? And this is this becomes a constitutional thing.
Well, you know what? When the hands-free law was passed, it was announced. I heard it on the radio when they first announced the first offense is $25, the second offense is $50, third offense is $75. Well, you know, I actually got one of those tickets right after this law came into effect, and it wasn't $25; it was $168.
Exactly.
That's what we're talking about here. And there, you know, you look at the breakdown, and it's all these little fees that are laid on there to support, as you said, the court system.
Court costs.
And it's just ridiculous. You know, you don't even go to court. You just pay the ticket, but you're paying for all the other charades that are going on in traffic court, which is, by the way, a freaking joke, if you ask me.
Yeah, like there are other countries in the world. In fact, there are entire continents in the world. And there's other shady shit they do, but there are certain things that they do right. And one of them is free education, and one of them is fair representation under the law. And one of those fair representations under the law is free quality legal representation. And also, I suppose what we would call bail here. You know, but what they call fair bail is a $15,000 bond. And that's if you like get picked up for it, you get caught drunk driving. Your bail is $15,000. Nobody has that kind of fucking money. But the reason why they're able to call it fair.
Well, let's not forget now, if you go to a bail's bondsman, you give him $1,500.
Exactly.
And he vouches for the rest for you to appear.
Right, and that is why they're able to call it fair representation under the law, a fair fine under the law, because you get to pay someone $1,500, but you don't get that money back. If you pay the $15,000 bail bond, and you show up to court and you do all of your things, that's when you get your money back. But that bond, you don't get back, which means that that's what your fine is. And it turns out that even these days, $1,500 is not fair under the law, because that ends up being like more than a month's pay for most people in this country. And it's horse shit.
Well, it's no small change to the man in the street, that's for sure.
Absolutely, man. So we're going through some facts. One of them was that the government guarantees to fill 90% of the bed space in private prisons, and that's garbage. Like that's
So that's in their contract?
Yeah, man. These private companies demand that of the
So if they
state
have
or federal
1,000
government.
beds, then 900 of them have to be filled up, and if we only fill 500 of them, we still pay for another 400 beds that are not being used.
So you might as well just put motherfuckers in that bed. Right? So there's that.
What a philosophy.
Okay, so another one is inmates are used for slave labor. This is one of the kinds of slave labor that was not protected under the 13th Amendment of our Constitution that was drafted in part by Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, right? The one who freed the slaves still said, you can still fuck prisoners. And there are corporations, Walmart, Whole Foods, unfortunately, are among these. So if you think you're going to Whole Foods, like, doing the right thing, buying organic food, a lot of those crops are picked by prisoners who are most likely in there for non-violent crimes. You are exploiting their labor. And these people are not getting paid minimum wage. Obviously, this person did something wrong. But the fact that they are getting paid pennies on the dollar for their labor is not serving anyone. It's not serving that person in paying his debts to society. It's not paying the government. It's not really, the only thing it's doing is benefiting the corporation. Let's call it Whole Foods. Whole Foods isn't writing them a check for the difference of the of the wage that that they're fucking this person out of. These people are being exploited for slave labor.
You are only a criminal by definition of the law. This
For
is
sure.
something, you broke some law that was written up by some legislators to prevent or not prevent something in particular. But the
For
truth
sure.
is that you may not have done anything wrong, in essence, but by definition of this particular law, you are now, quote unquote, a criminal. And the majority of people in prison, from what I understand, are not violent criminals. They are people who wrote some bad checks, they are people who cheated somebody out of something else, or they're people who had an ounce of marijuana on them when they were driving around in their car. And I mean, come on. For one thing, marijuana is legal in so many states at this point in time, but it's still considered illegal under the federal law. Why do you think that is?
It's garbage. All of these things. And if you're saying, well, you know, if you didn't commit crimes, you wouldn't end up in prison now, you know. And it's one of these things where, well, you know, there's certain things that should not be crimes. If you're not hurting anyone, there's no fucking reason why you should be in prison with people who hurt people, who have no problem raping or murdering. Because tell you what, asshole, that's what's going to happen to you. And there's no reason why a nonviolent person should be subjected to that. And so it's at this point in the episode that I want to, and yeah, you know, I want to do these things real quick because we have like 5 minutes left. The for-profit prison system is a lobbyist also, and they fund the campaigns of people like John Boehner and Hillary Clinton and John McCain. Okay? And, you know, yeah, that's what we're heading towards, assholes. You're going to be saluting the flag from behind bars because of all the things that are coming illegal. And I want to make this one full screen before I get to the final deal. Okay, so publicly run prisons. There are 52 publicly run prisons where the Freedom of Information Act is applicable. People can ask the public, you included, my fair audience, you can ask for documents to be made public through the Freedom of Information Act from 52 publicly run correctional facilities in America. The number of privately run facilities where you can request this information from, 0.
Wow.
Think about that for a minute and change something about your opinion immediately if you don't agree with me.
So in other words, the privately run prison facilities can also be used as a place where you can hide people away without any accountability.
Yep. And
which leads up to political prisoners.
Political prisoners, and as it turns out, like you brought up, Tom, these private prison facilities are increasingly being used to house immigration detainees. And it makes me feel like, and as it turns out, people, immigration is at an all-time low. There are less people crossing the border now than ever before. But there are more correctional facilities that are run by private organizations than there are facilities of higher education. Think about that for a minute. They would rather put you in prison in this country, the powers that be, the motherfuckers you vote for. They would rather put you in prison than build college campuses.
Well, and of course, we already know that education is not a priority of the government.
Nope.
The less informed the people are, the less educated they are, the easier they are to control. And hello, you know, they're ruining America's future by underfunding an educational system that is eventually not going to keep up with international standards in other nations, and America is going to lose business.
So before we completely run out of crime, I want to bring up the topic of jury nullification. And this is where, you know, I try and do a thing every week where, you know, where people ask, well, what can I do? Shit's fucked up. Norm, you say all these fucked up things. What can I do? Jury nullification is one of these things. And this is the concept where if you are called to a jury, you are under no obligation to find a person guilty of a crime if you believe the law under which they are being convicted is unjust.
Under which they're being prosecuted.
Yeah. Even if a person under the letter of the law is guilty of something, you still have the power, people, to say this person is not guilty, because sometimes laws are introduced that, you know, that are unconstitutional. Think about it, people. It was legal for Adolf Hitler to kill Jews. He made that legal. It doesn't mean it was ethically correct. Okay? And so thinking about that is, and understanding that like you do, understand that these are the kinds of things that they are beginning to try to enact upon us. And if you find yourself put on a jury, you have the ability, and I would argue, the obligation to ask yourself the question, did the crime that this person committed hurt anyone? And if it didn't, do they deserve to be in prison with people who will rape them and be violent to them? Do they deserve to be in the same place where they will be beaten by police officers for any reason? I'm going to leave you with that tonight. We're going to get to our fuckface of the week next time. I apologize for not getting to it. I know it's always a fun segment. Tom, I want to thank you again for being here. Do you have any last words for our friends out here before we close for tonight?
Yeah, drive carefully so you don't get pulled over, beaten by the police, and thrown in jail.
Remember your rights, everyone. And at the end of the day, always remember, wherever you're going, get there safe. Take care. Peace.